Hi folks, this is Ravisankar. In today's class, I will brief you about architecture, architecture that we follow in Sharepoint. Okay. Architecture, overview of architecture, overview of architecture, overview of architecture. So first of all, what is the definition of architecture? Architecture is a platform on top of which we can design, develop, build, deploy and run any kind of applications. Architecture is a common terminology which we use across different technologies or different domains. It is one of the buzzwords where you want to do a proper planning before developing any product, application or system. It's a layout. Okay, so if we use this terminology in different domains like construction, R&D, IT, any technology, so it's the proper synonym for this is it is a layout. It's a design to furnish a product, to develop an application, to run a system. Okay, so when you don't have a proper architecture, whatever the applications that you build on top of it will not be stable. So make sure that whenever we work on the architecture is planned appropriately considering all the future aspects. Okay, so architecture is nothing but it is a platform on which we can design, develop, build, deploy and run any kind of applications. It's a plan or layout. It's a plan or layout for you to build or develop the applications. Okay. In a real-time example, the road that we use for transportation, I call it as architecture. The reason behind this, whenever a road is laid out, people never consider to run either only a two-wheeler, three-wheeler, four-wheeler or five-wheeler. They always set up a platform, a strong platform, a stable platform on which they can run any kind of vehicle, whether it's a five-wheeler, 10-wheeler. That's how the architecture should fit in place. A realistic example. Okay, so you should be able to run any kind of applications. Okay, now how can I relate this example, the road that we use, to our architecture? Yes, when you consider any technology, and every technology has an engine which compiles your code, okay, which interprets and compiles your code. Now, if I develop a simple application, a website or different applications, my engine should be able to understand all those. It's not that I can target only one kind of application. It should target any kind of application, whether you are, so for example, let me take .NET. Okay, in .NET we have different languages, VB.NET, C#, .NET, JAS, ASP.NET, MVC, technology, ASP.NET technology, any kind of technology. Now if I take C#, .NET, now I want to build some sample applications like console application, Windows application, a class library, ASP.NET website, MVC project, anything. The moment we compile it, my CLR, common language runtime engine, is a standard runtime execution engine, okay, which understands your managed code. My CLR should be able to run all this application irrespective of my code, whether it's a console application, whether it's a class library, whether it's ASP.NET. So this is how my CLR will be able to read these applications and run on this platform. Okay, so this is nothing but your architecture. This architecture is categorized into two things. One is logical, the other one is physical. Okay, so coming towards IT standards, from an IT perspective, the architecture is categorized into two things. One is logical architecture, the other one is physical architecture. Logical architecture is nothing but how the communication happens internally from one layer to another layer. Internal communication between the layer. Internal communication between the layers. Physical is all about infrastructure or topology. So logical architecture is nothing but how the communication happens internally from one layer to another layer. Physical architecture is nothing but how do you scale out the number of servers, or nothing but choosing the topology for this particular project. Generally, if we need to have the differences between logical architecture and physical architecture, let me show you that. So developers who focus on the logical architecture, developers concentrate logical architecture. Who works on it? Developers work on the logical architecture, administrators works on the physical architecture. Developers concentrate more on choosing the enterprise library for the project, enterprise model for the project. General, every company has their own approach. Few companies use enterprise library, etc., etc. Microsoft is providing different kind of architectures. Administrators concentrate more on scaling out the number of servers or the number of servers for the project, or choosing the number of servers for the project. It's nothing but logical, is nothing but how many layers do you have in place, how can you isolate these layers. So how do you develop your business logic using these layers, using the design, code behind, and the database. So okay, and the physical is nothing but, okay, how do we scale out the number of servers, how do we scale out. So developers work more on this logical architecture. Administrators concentrate on the physical architecture. So we need to learn on the logical architecture how many layers we have. We have 3 types of layers. We see how they are distinguished. So in this session, let me walk you through on the logical architecture. Let us see how the flow works. Logical architecture, we might come across few terminologies called as authentication, authorization, access. It's all about access denied or access, okay. Allow or deny. So scenario or a flow. No. Let me draw a diagram in the notepad. I will not be able to do it. MS Paint. Let me draw the flow, see how it works. Let me remove this. Let me open a Word document if I have WinWord. Just I'm trying to draw the diagram on how it looks. Insert, shapes, insert shapes, and user, or let me write it as client or end user, client or end user sitting at home connected to internet, launch a browser IR Chrome. What happens, let's see, let me draw this diagram, then you will get to know how it works. Insert, let me just explain you so that you will have a very good understanding how it works. UI or presentation layer, business logic layer, data access layer. Okay. Now let me take this as an example, explain you the architecture and how it works. Okay, a client or end user sitting at home, connected to internet, launch a browser, IE or Chrome or etc. Request for a page. Request for a page. Request for a page. The first request www.gmail.com, the request will be sent to the presentation layer, nothing but your web server. We also call it as your web server, which hosts your website. Okay, the request is sent to, that's where you see the page being opened, the first user interface. Okay, from there, when you input your username or password, and click on the login button, it will trigger an event handler, nothing but it will make a connection to the application, your business logic, where your entire business logic needs to be executed. Entire business logic where it needs to be executed along with the services. It consists your code again with a web.config, which maintains your connection string, what is the DB server name, what is the database, all this. Internally will make a connection to the database server. It will respond back. Okay, it will respond back to the business logic layer, which authorizes the user, and check if the credentials whatever user has input, whether they are the valid credentials, and yes, then it will respond back to the presentation layer, and the presentation layer will respond back to this particular end user or client. So the response has to pass through 1, 2, 3 layers. So at any point of time it has to pass through these 3 layers. So we can also call it as 3-tier architecture. So let me draw the same thing is from here. Client or end user, the first connection will be made to the presentation layer. Presentation layer will make a connection to the database layer. Business logic layer will make a connection to the database layer. So at any point of time it has to pass through 1, 2, 3 layers. People call it as 3-tier architecture. Okay. At the same time we can also call this as M model, view, controller. So people also call this as model, view, control. So what is the difference between this 3-tier and MVC? We'll look into that, but first of all let us try to understand. In the end user, when they are connected to this internet, launch a browser, might go through gmail.com. First the page will be opened because the request is sent to the web server which hosts your website. This website internally is connected through some application pool, some pools which is associated with the service account, may make a connection to the database and open up that page, particular page. Now when we enter your username, password and click on this login button, it will invoke that event handler. We'll check against the connection string, what is the database server, what is the database name, user ID and password. Will fetch all the data from the database server and by performing the CRUD operations. Okay, using your stored procedure. It can be a select statement, it can be insert statement, it can be update, it can be delete. Okay, all the data that is queried against database will be returned to the business logic layer where we need to compile the entire business logic. Now once the data is fetched, we hold that in the business logic layer, validate the information and return back to the presentation layer. That's where the response is returned to the end user. That's where the end user can see the result by displaying the content or the information which is fetched from the database layer. Okay, so at any point of time the request and response has to pass through these 3 layers. So we call it as 3-tier. And the same thing, database we call it as model, presentation layer we call it as view, business logic layer we call it as controller. It is also called as MVC. So what is the difference between 3-tier MVC? Okay, before that there are 2 concepts which we need to learn: authentication and authorization. Authentication means access denied, authorization means allow or denied. Okay, now in this process, where does the authentication happen, where does the authorization happen? But before that, what is authentication? We can give very good examples. Airport as an example, example 1. Airport, passport. So for someone to enter into the airport, we have to display something to the security. Okay, until unless we display that, they won't allow us to enter into the airport. So we have to display passport. So passport acts as entry into the airport, access into the airport. That's nothing but, here in this context, it is called as authentication. Now once we entered into the airport, now we need to board some flights. Let's say we have 10 flights and our destination will be something. We cannot board all the flights, but before boarding the flight, we have to display something to the security again. Okay, that's called as boarding pass or your flight ticket, boarding pass. Okay, passport here in the airport example acts as authentication. Boarding pass or flight ticket. Acts as authorization. Hope this helps in the real time scenario. Okay. So we also have company premises. Let me say company premises. Okay. Let's say we are working for a same level 5 company. Now, for an employee to enter into the company premises, he has to display something to the security. That's nothing but ID card. Now, once he entered into the building, let's say your company has 3 floors: ground floor, first floor, and second floor. Ground floor is for HR, first floor is for finance, second floor is for R&D. Now, you are an IT resource, you are not authorized personnel to enter into ground floor and first floor. Now, for you to enter into the ground floor and first floor or second floor, we show something to security guard, we swipe something. That is called as access card. So, when you swipe your card in the ground floor and first floor, it will alarm. It will alarm saying that unauthorized access. You also see unauthorized personnel. Okay. So here ID card, access, access card, access, authorization. Okay. Now in this flow, where does the authentication happen? Where does the authorization happen? So authentication always happens in the presentation layer. It's the first point. Nothing but the site which is configured on the web server should be associated with a service account. That service account will make a connection to the database, because that entry will be there in the configuration file, will communicate to the database, fetch the data. Now once the data is fetched, in the business logic layer, we authorize if the user who entered his credentials are valid. If valid,